This is the story of Ryan Carter and his girlfriend Lily Bennett. They had been together for 4 years when Ryan first noticed that something in their relationship had begun to operate on two separate frequencies, one that was visible and one that hummed quietly beneath everything, just below the range of ordinary hearing. They were not unhappy, not exactly. They shared a lease, a coffee maker, a habit of watching television with the volume slightly too low. But somewhere in the comfortable architecture of their life together, a small unnamed thing had taken root. Not betrayal in any classical sense, not yet, but the conditions for it. Lily's quiet need to feel magnetic, and Ryan's quieter need to feel chosen. The story that follows is not about a villain. It is about two people who wanted different things from the same relationship and were too proud, or too tired, or too afraid to say so plainly. What unraveled between them did not arrive with noise. It came the way dusk comes, gradually, and then all at once. The apartment they shared on Clement Street had good light in the mornings. That was the thing Ryan would remember later. Not arguments, not a single defining moment, but the quality of early light through the kitchen window, how it fell across the tile in long amber panels while he made coffee and Lily slept. Those mornings felt like evidence of something. He wasn't sure what. A life that was working, maybe. Or a life that looked like it was. They had fallen into the way of couples who have been together long enough to stop performing for each other, which is either the most honest form of love or the most dangerous, depending on what fills the silence. For Ryan and Lily, it was mostly warmth. Mostly. He would bring her coffee without asking because she always wanted it. She would leave the shower running a little longer than necessary because she knew he liked stepping in when it was already warm. These were not small things. He knew that. But they had also, somewhere in the past year, stopped talking the way they used to. The way that felt like excavation, like you were genuinely trying to find out who the other person was becoming. Marcus had appeared in their orbit through Lily's graduate program. She was finishing a master's in urban planning. He was an adjunct who'd done his thesis on pedestrian infrastructure in mid-sized American cities. Not a glamorous subject. Ryan had met him 3 times before the summer. A department gathering, a birthday party for someone he didn't know well. Once at a farmer's market when Lily ran into him near the cheese stalls. He seemed fine, easygoing, the kind of person who asks follow-up questions. Ryan had no instinct against him. Not then. The first moment that lodged itself somewhere uncomfortable was small enough to dismiss, and Ryan did dismiss it, almost entirely. It was a Saturday in late June. A group of Lily's program friends had rented a house near the coast for the weekend, one of those loose, slightly improvised arrangements that graduate students pull together. Ryan went willingly. He liked her friends, or he liked them well enough. The house was pleasant, slightly musty, positioned on a low bluff with a view of brown grass and then ocean. Marcus was there. On the second afternoon, they were all on the back deck, and Lily had asked someone. It might have been Marcus, or it might have been the general atmosphere, to help with sunscreen on her back. Ryan was maybe 12 feet away, reading, or pretending to. He watched Marcus's hands move in slow, even strokes between her shoulder blades. It was attentive in a way that wasn't strictly necessary for sunscreen application. A palm held slightly too long at the base of her neck. Ryan looked back at his book. That evening, when they were getting ready for dinner, he mentioned it, not as an accusation, just as an observation, because he was still the kind of person who believed that small things deserved to be named. Just the way he was touching your back, he said. It didn't look like sunscreen. Lily turned from the mirror. She wasn't angry, which somehow made it worse. She looked at him with a particular kind of patience, the patience of someone explaining something obvious. He was just helping with sunscreen, she said. If you're that jealous, maybe you should think about why. The sentence had the quality of something rehearsed, not in the sense that she'd planned it, but in the sense that it was reaching for a framework she'd already built. Your reaction is the problem. Your perception is the issue. Ryan stood with his shirt half buttoned and said nothing. He didn't have the vocabulary yet for what he was feeling. It wasn't quite hurt, not quite anger. It was more like the sensation of pressing on a bruise you didn't know you had. He let it go. They had a pleasant dinner. Marcus made a joke that made Lily laugh until she had to put down her fork. Ryan laughed too. A half beat later, on the drive home the next afternoon, they held hands across the console. He told himself the thing in his chest was unreasonable. He told himself a lot of things in those early weeks that were easier to believe than the alternative. By August, Ryan had a private vocabulary for it. He never said the words aloud, not even to himself in any direct way. But they lived in him as a kind of low-grade atmospheric pressure. Something is wrong with the angle. It wasn't any single thing. That was what made it difficult. The absence of a smoking gun, the presence instead of 100 tiny calibrations that were each individually explainable. Marcus had started texting more regularly. Lily would glance at her phone during dinner, smile at something, put it face down. She didn't hide it ostentatiously. She just redirected her face, smoothed her expression, returned to whatever they'd been discussing. Ryan noticed but didn't say anything. He had already learned what happened when he said something. They were good at evenings together, which was a strange thing to recognize. They could watch television and be genuinely comfortable. They could cook together and not run out of things to say. The relationship still had texture and warmth. That was the part that confused him. How something could feel simultaneously real and slightly hollow, like a piece of fruit that looked perfect until you pressed it and found the give. One Wednesday, he came home from work to find her laughing on the phone in the kitchen. She held up one finger, 1 minute, and drifted toward the bedroom, not closing the door fully, but almost. When she came out 20 minutes later, she was fleshed in the way that good conversation produces. "Marcus?" Ryan asked. He kept his voice neutral. He was learning how to ask questions that contained no punctuation. "Yeah." He stressed about his contract renewal. She opened the refrigerator, studied its contents. "I told him to talk to the department chair directly instead of just emailing. That was nice of you. He doesn't have a lot of people he can call." Ryan said, "He has a whole department." Lily looked at him over the refrigerator door. "You know what I mean." He did. That was the thing. He understood her meaning exactly, which was what made it hard to argue with. She was being a good friend. Friends called each other. Friends gave advice. There was nothing wrong with any individual piece of it. He just couldn't stop noticing the pattern the pieces made. They ate dinner. They talked about her thesis defense timeline. He told her about a frustrating meeting at work. She listened well, asked a real question. He remembered why he loved her, which was not a comfortable thing to remember in that moment. Later, lying in the dark, he said, "Do you think Marcus thinks of you as more than a friend?" There was a pause. "I think," Lily said carefully, "that you have a tendency to turn normal things into threats." He lay still. Outside, a car passed, its headlights moving across the ceiling in a slow arc. "Maybe," he said. "It's a pattern with you. Remember Daniel? You did the same thing." Daniel had been a coworker 2 years ago who had done nothing. Ryan had, in retrospect, overreacted to Daniel. He knew this. The memory was useful to her in a specific way, and he recognized that it was being used. He turned onto his side. "I'm not saying it's Marcus's fault," he said. "I'm saying I notice things. You notice things that aren't there." He didn't respond. She fell asleep before he did, her breathing evening out in the familiar rhythm he'd memorized years ago. He watched the ceiling and thought about the way Marcus's hand had sat at the base of her neck for just a few seconds too long, and the way Lily had not moved away from it, and the way she'd described the weekend to her mother afterward as lovely, so relaxing, really needed it. He thought for the first time, something that he immediately tried to put away. "She is gaslighting me, and she believes every word of it." He didn't know if that made it better or worse. He stared at the ceiling for a while longer. Then, and this was the moment that would matter, though he didn't know it yet, he made a decision that was quiet enough to feel like nothing. He would stop reacting, not out of strategy, not out of manipulation, but because he was tired of being the one who felt too much, the one who named things and then got handed back his own perception, refracted, distorted, returned to him as evidence of his deficiency. He would simply stop. He exhaled. He slept. He looked the next morning exactly like himself. Lily poured his coffee without asking because he always wanted it. He thanked her. They were warm to each other, easy, familiar. Only something behind his eyes had changed. Something quiet and irreversible, like a door that is clicked shut so softly you might not realize it's no longer open. He looked at her across the kitchen table, and the light fell in those long amber panels, and he thought, I wonder if anyone watching this would even notice. I don't know. Maybe like this story or share it or something. Lily looked up from her mug. What? Nothing, he said, just thinking out loud. She watched him for a moment with a small, uncertain frown, then looked back down. The room returned to its ordinary morning frequency. Ryan drank his coffee. The light moved. Nothing had changed. Everything had. September arrived with a quality of finality that the calendar didn't announce, but that felt somehow structural. Cooler evenings. The particular clarity of late summer light becoming autumnal. Ryan moved through the weeks with something that looked like his old self from the outside. He was present, functional, occasionally funny. He did not initiate any conversations about Marcus. He did not reach for his phone to check her patterns. He simply inhabited his own life with increasing completeness, as if filling a shape that had been slightly vacated for the past several months. Lily noticed the absence of his noticing. It took 3 weeks. He watched it happen the way you watch a shift in weather from a window, with attention but without urgency. She started mentioning Marcus in casual conversation more often, inserting his name into contexts that didn't require it. Marcus had this interesting thing to say about the zoning proposal. Marcus thinks I should apply for the fellowship. Ryan responded each time with a pleasant, almost impersonal interest, the way you'd respond to a colleague's anecdote. He didn't tense. He didn't grow quiet in the loaded way he used to. He just listened, said something reasonable, and moved on. One evening in early October, she came home later than expected and told him she'd been at a study session that had run long. At the library, he asked. Marcus's place, actually. We were going over the grant application. He nodded. He was chopping an onion, and he kept chopping. Is that okay? She said. The question surprised him, not because she was asking, but because of what was underneath it. She was checking for a reaction. He recognized with a clarity that was almost clinical that she had expected the familiar cycle. The quiet concern he'd express, the dismissal she'd provide, the low-grade tension that would follow and eventually require her to reassure him, which would put her in the position of the patient, generous partner managing his unreasonable insecurity. It was a dynamic that had, he understood now, served something in her. The reassurance had made her feel valuable. His jealousy had made her feel desired. He looked at her. Why wouldn't it be okay? She blinked. I know you've had concerns about Lily, he said. And his voice was genuinely mild. I'm making pasta. Do you want some? A silence moved through the kitchen like weather. Ryan. Her voice had changed register. Is something wrong? No, he said. It was true. She sat down at the counter and watched him cook, and there was something uncertain in her posture, something slightly off balance. You've been different, she said. Different how? I don't know. Quieter. I've always been quiet. Not like this. He added the pasta to the water and turned. He looked at her steadily, without edge. I think, he said, we've been operating in a way that doesn't work for me anymore. I don't mean that dramatically. I just mean I've been unhappy in a quiet way for a while, and I've been asking questions about things I wasn't sure about, and every time I did, you told me my perception was the problem, and I spent a lot of energy wondering if you were right. I don't wonder anymore. Her face moved through something complicated. I wasn't, she started. I know, he said, and he did know, that was the thing. She hadn't been cruel. She hadn't been a villain in the story she was telling herself. She had simply wanted to feel wanted, and Marcus had offered that, and she had accepted it in the particular way of people who believe they can keep separate currencies from touching. She had also, genuinely, believed that Ryan's discomfort was his problem to manage. Both of those things were true at once. That was what made it so difficult to be angry at her. I think, she said, You're making this into something it isn't. Maybe, he said. I've been wrong before. She looked at him a moment longer. He turned back to the stove. They ate dinner mostly quietly. She tried once more, halfway through, to explain the grant application and the complexity of the department dynamic and the way Marcus had been a real support through her thesis stress. He listened. He responded. He did not yield. She went to bed before him. He stayed up and read by the lamp in the living room, a novel he'd been meaning to finish for 2 months. It was very good. He read until midnight with genuine absorption, which was something he hadn't managed in a while. The decision he'd made in August had not hardened into anger. It had simply calcified into clarity. He still loved her. He knew that. But love, he had come to understand, is not an argument against anything. It is not a reason to keep standing in a room where you've been told, quietly and persistently, that what you see isn't there. He finished the chapter. He turned off the lamp. He went to bed. In the dark, Lily was awake. He could tell by her breathing, but neither of them spoke, and eventually the silence filled in the way silence does. And the apartment held them both in its ordinary way, and nothing was resolved. And somehow that was already the answer. By December, Lily had a version of events that was internally coherent and largely comfortable to inhabit. In this version, Ryan had undergone a shift, some unnamed internal withdrawal that had arrived without cause and without warning, turning him cold and distant in a way that she had tried, patiently, to address. She had been the one asking if something was wrong. She had been the one reaching across the silence. He had been the one who refused to meet her. She told this version to her friend Priya over wine in early December, sitting in Priya's kitchen, and Priya had listened with appropriate sympathy and then asked, carefully, whether Ryan's concerns about Marcus had ever been legitimate. Lily had been quiet for a moment. He was jealous, she said. That's different from legitimate. Is it always? She had changed the subject. The truth was that Marcus had kissed her in November, at his apartment, after an evening that had extended in the way she'd allowed evenings to extend all fall. One more drink, one more hour, the easy gravity of someone who made her feel electric and noticed and rare. She had kissed him back, once. And then she had stepped away and said she needed to go, and she had driven home with her hands very still on the wheel. She hadn't told Ryan. She hadn't told herself what it meant either. It was easier to locate the story elsewhere, in Ryan's detachment, in his mysterious withdrawal, in the relationship's drift, which she attributed to his coldness rather than to the conditions she had cultivated. This was not cynical self-deception. It was the kind that operates like an immune response, automatic, protective, almost biological in its efficiency. Ryan, meanwhile, was becoming someone slightly new in the way that people do when they stop managing other people's perceptions of them. He had dinner with his friend Joel, whom he hadn't seen in months, and discovered he had more to say than he'd expected. He started going to the gym in the mornings again, not as a project or a statement, but because he wanted to. And there was something clarifying about wanting things again without immediately calculating how they would land. He was reading more. He was sleeping better, which he hadn't expected. He had not left Lily. He hadn't made a formal decision. But the apartment felt different from within his own skin. Less like a territory to be defended, more like a temporary arrangement whose end he was beginning to see from a distance. He thought about her still. He thought about the mornings and the coffee and the particular sound of her laugh when something genuinely surprised her, which was rarer than it should have been. He thought about who they'd been at the beginning, when they talked until very late about things that mattered and fallen asleep still loosely holding the thread. He wondered, sometimes, how much of what had gone wrong was her, and how much was simply time, which erodes things without malice. He did not think about Marcus with much feeling. That had surprised him. He had expected jealousy to be the loudest part of this, and instead it was the quietest. Less an ache, more a kind of tired recognition. What had hurt wasn't Marcus. It was the repeated experience of naming something real and being returned to himself as the problem. In January, Lily said, "I think we should talk. Really talk." "Okay," he said. "Not like this. Actually talk." He said, "I'm here." She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same light, the same tiles, and she said, "I feel like I've been losing you for months, and I don't know what I did." He looked at her. He thought about answering in several different ways. He chose, "I don't think it's about what you did." "Then what?" "I think," he said slowly, "we started wanting different things from each other a while ago, and we didn't say it, and then it got harder to say." "I never wanted anything different," she said. Her voice had a quality of appeal in it, of genuine reaching. He recognized it, and he felt something. Not indifference, not coldness, but a settled kind of sadness. The kind that sits down and stays. "I think you did," he said. "I think you wanted to feel a certain way, and I wasn't providing it, and you found it somewhere else. I don't think you meant for it to go anywhere. I think you just—" He paused. "I think you told yourself there was nothing to manage." She was quiet for a long time. "The Marcus thing was, you don't have to explain it," he said. And he meant it. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her in a long time, something unguarded, slightly undone, the face beneath the version she'd been maintaining. "Are you leaving me?" she asked. He thought about it. It was the first time the question had been asked directly, in those words, and he sat with it for a moment with genuine attention. "I don't know," he said. "I think something already left. I don't know if it comes back." She pressed her hands flat on the table. He watched her and felt a wave of something that wasn't quite love anymore and wasn't quite its absence. More like the afterimage of it, the shape it leaves when it moves. They sat together in the winter kitchen for a while longer. The light was different in January. Less warm, more precise. It was March when Lily understood, fully and without any remaining negotiating room, that Ryan was gone, not physically, not yet, but in the essential way that matters more. He was still there. He still came home to the apartment on Clement Street. They still made coffee in the same machine, slept on the same side of the bed, observed the small rituals of proximity that are almost indistinguishable from intimacy if you don't look closely. But she had started looking closely in the way that people do when they can no longer afford not to. And what she saw was someone who had arrived at a kind of peace that did not include her at its center. He was not cold. That was the thing she couldn't explain to Priya or to herself. He was not punishing her. He was not performing detachment or constructing silence as a form of cruelty. He was simply present in himself in a way that had very little to do with her anymore. He asked about her thesis defense and listened with genuine interest. He remembered to buy the yogurt she liked. He laughed at things that were funny. He was, by any external accounting, a good and attentive partner, but when she reached for him, she could feel that she was reaching across something. Not distance exactly, more like a settled fact, something that had already been decided by the time she realized there was a decision to be made. One Saturday in mid-March, they were at the kitchen table with coffee and he was reading something on his phone. She watched him without meaning to study him, and she noticed things she'd stopped noticing, the particular way he held his mug with both hands, the line of his jaw, the quality of his attention when it was directed elsewhere. She thought about the beginning when she had been the thing he directed it toward, and the thought moved through her with a weight she hadn't expected. "Ryan," she said. He looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been trying to figure out how to say that properly for months, and I don't think there's a proper way, so I'm just—" She stopped. "I dismissed things that I shouldn't have dismissed. I made you feel like your perception was defective. It wasn't." She paused. "Marcus, you don't have to," he said. "I want to, Lily." His voice was gentle, not closed, not weaponized, simply finished. "I know. I know all of it. I think I knew most of it before I let myself know it, if that makes sense." "Then why didn't you?" "Because every time I said something, I was told I was the problem." He said it without accusation, and eventually I believed it. And then one day, I stopped believing it. And by then something had. He set his mug down. Something had already changed. She looked at her hands. The morning light moved across the tiles the way it had always moved, and she thought, with a quality of grief she hadn't anticipated, about how many mornings had happened in this kitchen that she'd failed to fully occupy. "Is it too late?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. She had the sense that he was considering the question honestly, which was somehow more painful than a quick answer would have been. "I think," he said, "that some things when they go don't come back the same way, and trying to bring them back the same way makes something else, something." He searched for the word, something that knows it was reconstructed. "That's not a no," she said. "It's not a yes either." She nodded. She had known this was coming, in the way that the body often knows things before the mind agrees to accept them. She had known it in January, maybe earlier. She had known it on the night in November when she'd driven home with still hands and said nothing. "I think," she said carefully, "I was afraid that needing only you meant something. I don't know, that I was small or limited or too easy to satisfy. So I made sure there was always something outside, always something that made me feel." She stopped. "That's not an excuse." "I know," he said. "I know why you did it. Does that matter?" He thought about it. "Understanding something doesn't necessarily repair it," he said. "It just means you're not confused anymore." She looked at him. He was himself, fully himself, in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. No defensiveness, no reaching, no performance of calm. Just Ryan sitting with his coffee, having arrived at something she had not yet arrived at and perhaps wouldn't. "I miss you," she said. "You're right here and I miss you." "I know," he said quietly. They sat together in the ordinary morning light of the kitchen they shared, and the life they had built with such genuine, imperfect love. In the silence that had become neither hostile nor hopeful, but simply what remained when everything else had been said. Outside, the street moved with its Saturday rhythms. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. The coffee cooled. Ryan looked out the window at the white March sky. He was not, she realized, waiting for anything. He had stopped waiting a long time ago. So quietly, she hadn't heard it happen. That was the thing about the way he had changed. It made no sound when it occurred, and so she had kept living as though nothing had shifted, right up until the moment she could no longer pretend that the ground beneath them was the same ground it had been. She had loved him. She still did. She had just loved how she felt around Marcus slightly more, for a while, and she had told herself that was sustainable. And she had been wrong. And now she was sitting with the specific grief of someone who has made an irreversible choice while believing it was reversible. He picked up his coffee. She looked at her own hands. There was nothing left to say that would change what the morning already knew. The light moved. The room held them, and in the quiet, underneath everything, beneath the coffee and the familiar tiles and the sound of the street, the relationship ended, not with a door slamming or a final declaration, but with the soft, devastating sound of someone simply breathing differently now, of someone who had already, in every way that mattered, gone.